Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by ctmfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. I am your host Pushpendra Mehta, and today I am pleased to be joined by Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner at Strategic Treasurer. Craig, it's great to have you back on the podcast.
It's good to be back on the Open Treasury podcast again, Push. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We truly value your time and expertise as we delve into the critical topics that are shaping the landscape of corporate treasury management and beyond. In today's episode, we'll be covering 4 key topics, namely, treasurers expect technology to dominate their time and attention in the coming years, the increasing frequency of payment fraud attacks targeting e-commerce merchants, global companies navigating from China plus one to a China plus many supply chain strategy, and finally, GTreasury's acquisition of CashAnalytics. As always, our audience can watch videos on the CTM File YouTube channel and explore insightful articles, interviews, and industry roundups on ctmfile.com, either by visiting the website or by following the links provided in our show notes. Let's begin today's discussion with our first topic, which is about treasurers anticipating technology to consume most of their time in the coming years. The treasury community is expecting that technology will take up most of its time and attention within the next 5 years. Even in 12 months' time, treasurers expect the time spent on technology will be second only to capital and liquidity management, according to ACT, or the Association of Corporate Treasurers' recent Business of Treasury 2024 survey report. This 11th annual edition of the ACT's Business of Treasury research included responses from 188 treasurers worldwide. Over the past 4 years, corporate treasurers have faced numerous challenges and ongoing economic uncertainty. During these uncertain times, treasurers have drawn on their expertise and resilience, focusing their attention on treasury operations and controls, as well as capital and liquidity management, risk management, and business strategy, as per the ACT report. The ACT survey goes on to elaborate that for the immediate future or short term, treasurers will remain concentrated on capital and liquidity management. Nevertheless, the report suggests that treasurers foresee a shift in priorities 5 years out. At that point, treasurers are likely to dedicate significantly more time to technological advancement. As goes the next 12 months, the ACT report highlights that nearly 7 out of 10 expect to be spending more time on technological advances, followed by change management, business strategy, and risk management. Craig, your company, Strategic Treasurer, has been producing the Treasury Technology Analyst report for several years, with the next edition of the Analyst report set to release at the AFP conference next month. Considering what you observed in treasury management and technology over the past decade, the challenges treasurers have faced in the last 4 years, along with the trend towards digital transformation in corporate treasuries, do you believe that technology will play a dominant role in treasury operations over the next 1 to 5 years compared to capital and liquidity management?
That's a good question, and it's a hard question. I think a couple things come to mind. I mean, technology now is important. It's a huge focus. It's not decreased in importance for some time. So we've had technology be a predominant area of focus for a while, and it's in almost everything. So it's hard to say, what about capital and liquidity management? Is that bigger or smaller than what's going to go on with technology? Because technology is rolling into that area. I don't see too much in treasury. Even in relationship management, for example, which is a lot of talking, for example, you're still capturing information. You might be doing share of wallet exercises or some risk-adjusted return on capital. See how your banks are looking at you. It's hard to say which one's going to be more because technology is infused in almost everything that the treasurer does, everything the treasury area handles and touches. So I'm going to have to say it's pretty easy to go with the tech because Treasury does more than just capital liquidity management, business strategy, change management, et cetera, some of what the survey said. So I'm going to have to be biased on that. I don't think of technology as something completely separate, like a functional area or an area of responsibility. It's how it gets done. So that's why it's a hard question, because there's a point where you're spending more time on projects, bringing things up to speed, layering in new tech to accomplish greater integration, better analysis, a superior way of handling risks and threats against the organization. I mean, that's how I would answer that.
Is there anything else in this survey report that caught your attention that you'd like to enumerate on?
Yeah, there's quite a bit good in this ACT survey as it comes up, and it's well worth the read. One of the charts that stood out to me is the one where it shows treasury operations and control and then capital and liquidity management. So we oftentimes use the term cash forecasting, which is a subcomponent of, liquidity management. And so you can see that for multiple years over a long time, that was number one. It's slightly slipped below treasury operations and control as that has increased, over the last several surveys that have gone on. What we've seen in our research and in other surveys as well, you can see that forecasting is almost always the top one, or it's one of the top two over a long period, like 10 years. And you can look at this survey, going back 8 years or so, you can see how it's always been right at number one or number two. We see that regularly. What do we mean by number one or two? It's where they're spending their time. You can see it from this report. We've done surveys. Our research shows it's the top area they spend their time. They would spend more time. It's a top area of focus. They plan to invest in it heavily. So it's got all of these drivers for an area of focus. And a fair bit of treasury operations and control is about liquidity management. So there's a fair bit of intersection there. So forecasting is certainly a key area. And I really enjoy seeing that chart and those trends over time. The other area, Push, was we looked at why will technological advances become more important in 5 years' time? That's another one that I was trying to think about before we spoke. I didn't know what you were going to ask, but I figured that might be one of the areas. And it's tech is embedded in every process. We're trying to streamline it so it's end to end. We're familiar with application programming interface or APIs, the use of AI and machine learning, including generative AI. Those are becoming activities that companies are using today. People are also testing those technologies out and will adopt them. So APIs, AI, payment changes, and forecasting, I think those are all going to be very significant over this next 5-year period. They're going to continue to expand. I don't necessarily see it being a jump in 5 years. But let me tell you a little bit why, because I think those are accelerating well before 5 years. The overall transformation or the shift from one technology standard or hill to another, right, as you shift from installed solutions to application service providers to software as a service, maybe even to cloud native solutions, rendering different capabilities, providing access to different capabilities. This whole transformation of the technology, there is going to be a shift, over the next 5 years, but over the next 5 to 10 years, where people are continuing to upgrade their technology. And we've seen it. The move to software as a service, first called application service provider. We saw that really start to take place in 2001. By 2008, 2009, it was the dominant force in new sales. Well, everything's at that level or more, right? They're moving in different ways. And there's new technology that comes out in different areas, different ways of connecting, different formats. And so some of that technology is very transformative. It brings embedded AIs, a natural language search. There's a significant set of capabilities that's coming. So that transformation will involve more time as people upgrade through what's existing today, kind of the continual upgrade process.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, Craig. That was incredibly valuable. Let's now turn our attention to the second story, which is about e-commerce merchants being subjected to more payment fraud attacks than in previous years. E-commerce merchants are facing more fraud attacks than they have in prior years. The number of different types of fraud experienced by the average merchant this year rose from 3 to 4, according to the 2024 Global E-commerce Payments and Fraud Survey report, produced by the Merchant Risk Council along with Visa, Acceptance Solutions, and Verifi. A key finding from this year's survey report is that e-commerce merchants perceive a clear and strong connection between how widely accepted and used a certain payment method is and how high the risk or rate of fraud is for that method. This suggests that merchants believe the most popular payment methods are considered to have the highest rates of fraud. Put simply, when queried about which of the accepted payment methods had the highest rate of fraud, merchants ranked cards and digital wallets as the top two, followed by mobile payments, buy now, pay later, debit transfers, and real time payments. E-commerce merchants are also encountering a variety of fraud attacks. Topping the list of most prevalent forms of fraud are refund and policy abuse, first-party misuse, phishing, card testing, identity theft, account takeover, and loyalty fraud. Craig, as payments innovation and payment methods proliferate, the opportunities for perpetrating e-commerce payment fraud will increase significantly. While e-commerce merchants will need to refine their tactics, tools, and technologies for mitigating payment fraud, do you believe a time has come that specific and consistent payment security and fraud prevention training for e-commerce treasury and payments employees could become a key competitive differentiator?
I think it's perhaps moved from a key competitive differentiator to a cost of doing business and a standard of good corporate conduct. You brought up some really good points in that article. It's what's changed. The number of different methods of attack have increased, right? So there's more options that they're using, and the attack velocity or frequency has increased. So there's more points of exposure, more attacks, and this is certainly brought about by the success they've had, and they're able to leverage the fact that they're using automation. They're using more sophisticated tools to greater effect and realizing a greater return, which puts organizations at risk. So a lot of this is that same story. They're more sophisticated, they have a better payoff, so they're realizing a better yield, and they're going after every area and then emphasizing on areas that might be a little bit softer targets. Most of these areas, they're also compromising people who need to be trained. So to your point, that is a key area of focus. If we go back not too many years, it was essentially 100% of banks train their employees on all kinds of cyber fraud, as well as payment security. And corporations is a little slower, right? The vast majority of corporations are training on cyber fraud. But this idea of payment security needs to be much more broadly carried out through organizations.
Well, Craig, you made some interesting points. Let's shift the discussion to the third news story, which is about global companies navigating from China plus one to a China plus many supply chain world. India, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Mexico, and Poland have benefited from the China plus one or C plus one supply chain strategy pursued by global corporations in recent years to avoid investing solely in China by diversifying production and sourcing activities into other countries, thereby reducing dependence on the world's manufacturing superpower. Despite the rise of the China plus one strategy, China remains a dominant force in global manufacturing, amplified by its high value added production prowess. As the world's largest manufacturing economy and exporter of goods, China's superior manufacturing power cannot be dethroned by any country anytime soon. Why is this the case? Lazard Geopolitical Advisory's August 2024 report, The Geopolitics of Supply Chains, outlines the reason. Companies seeking to diversify and de-risk supply chains outside of China will find an ambiguous, complex operating environment with no obvious single candidate to replace China. Foreign companies are unlikely to move their entire manufacturing facilities to another nation. Instead, they will have to engage with different geographies to find solutions to their own manufacturing needs. This context explains why, instead of limiting themselves to a China plus one strategy, organizations across the globe are now navigating a China plus many approach. Let me share some interesting information or data with you. India is poised to surpass Japan and Germany to become the world's third largest economy by 2027. Indonesia forecasted to become the world's sixth largest economy by 2027. Thailand experiencing a 5-year high in investment applications. Vietnam witnessing exceptional growth in its manufacturing sector over the past decade, with the sector now accounting for more than 20% of the country's GDP. Mexico, with its geographical proximity to the US, making it a preferred nearshoring destination, and Poland, with the UK's Prime Minister cautioning that it is on track to overtake the British economy by 2030, are compelling indicators that these 6 countries offer incredible opportunities for multinational corporations to enter, establish, and expand. They also present attractive manufacturing alternatives and investment destinations compared to China. Craig, with global corporations navigating from China plus one to China plus many phase, could you suggest a couple of key aspects, whether it's in cash management, liquidity planning, risk management, foreign exchange exposure, or regulatory compliance, that corporate treasurers should be mindful of to support diversified supply chains across multiple geographies, jurisdictions, or countries?
I like the way you summarize part of that question, the diversification aspect of it. I think one of the things where Treasury in particular has caused harm in organizations was this focus on working capital almost exclusively, which brought about things like just-in-time inventory. So freeing up your capital to go other places, getting your inventory at the last minute, just getting enough to run and keep things going. Well, that created a problem. And so optimizing working capital does not mean minimizing working capital. And so this diversification of having multiple sources and channels is a good balance of the financial aspect like working capital and the efficiency that goes on with that. But it also balances out the risk of not having enough trading partners or focused in one particular area. And we've seen challenges there. So I think that's a little bit of a cautious that if we maximize certain things, we're not optimizing across the different responsibilities of Treasury. So we'll take that on the chin for that activity. I think that the diversification strategy is so good in so many areas. Treasury certainly believes that. Many other areas of an organization understand the focus there. The move from China to China plus one to China plus many is interesting. One of the comments you made was there seems to be no player who will just supplant China, it's been built up over many years, huge population, but it's also not a zero-sum game. The economy is not based upon, you mentioned the UK talking about Poland supplanting it as far as the number one production. There's not a restriction on what can be produced. It's not there's 100 units of production. There's essentially no limit. So what areas are doing good with allowing for creativity, the use of technology, sufficient rule of law, so there's capital, a number of different areas that make sense, plus the mindset. I won't go into a book I read that kind of challenged some of the, hey, you just have to have rule of law and a few other areas, but I found it really, really interesting to say there has to be a mindset in the economy to be productive. So to that end, it does make sense for organizations to have a nice, diverse supply chain, especially for the more critical factors. They're doing that. They're proceeding that way. There's been enough lessons learned recently, and that's sticking. And so I'm particularly pleased to see that. Some of the lessons we learned on counterparty risk is not sticking as well in the Treasury domain. And so there's lessons about diversification, over-concentration in a single, counterparty. And so the defense is, well, we'll bank with a bank that's too big to fail. So I think we need to challenge how we think across some of these different spheres. But to your point, you're bringing up a lot of what's changing in the overall economic environment around the globe. There's a lot. And so there's a significant opportunity for good and effective trade and for many countries that are maybe second world to grow a lot of their economy so that more of its first world status.
Well, Craig, thank you for bringing these crucial aspects to the forefront. Moving on, let's delve into the fourth story, which covers GTreasury's acquisition of CashAnalytics. GTreasury, the pioneer and global leader in digital treasury solutions for the Office of the CFO, has added to its treasury technology portfolio the acquisition of CashAnalytics, the world's leading cash forecasting and AR and AP analytics solution. More than 1,000 business entities across 40 plus countries trust CashAnalytics to analyze and optimize over $100 billion in cash flow every day. Craig, were you surprised by the acquisition? Do you think it'll align well with GTreasury's goals? Any thoughts on how might this acquisition shift the landscape of treasury technology or influence the overall efficiency of treasury functions?
Yeah, so GTreasuries, I think they're 35 or 36 years old. They've moved through different types of technology. It wasn't that many years ago that the first private equity firm invested in them, provided funding, mainsail, and there's been an increase in investments from other parties to expand the office of the treasurer, the office of the CFO, however you want to describe that field. They've acquired different firms and folded them in for certain types of risk management. They've partnered with other firms. With CashAnalytics, this focus, this ability to provide more deep capabilities on the, let's call it the forecasting and planning front, it fits in well with the core area of what Treasury is responsible for. Managing liquidity, forecasting, moving funds, keeping track of your debt, handling the accounting that goes with that, doing so in a controlled manner, managing risks like FX, interest rate risk. This all fits within the core area. This is not expanding out to some, secondary or tertiary activity or function. It's they're building capabilities, and with the technology, they're able to integrate these more readily and more rapidly. So this certainly fits, and because they have backing of private equity, they can make these types of acquisitions. They've done it on the risk side, they've done it on the netting side, they've done it in multiple areas, and so providing more functionality allows them to offer their solution to a greater swath of the market.
Thank you, Craig, for your discerning inputs. Craig, as Strategic Treasurer celebrates its 20th anniversary next week, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate you and your team on this remarkable milestone. Instead of asking you to select the biggest or most important story of the past week, can I request you to reflect on your 2 decades in Treasury advisory and share a few key lessons that you believe corporate Treasury professionals should keep in mind as they manage the evolving world of corporate cash and Treasury management?
That's a fun question. It's a hard question. I guess it's kind of like if you go over to someone's house and they want to show pictures of their kids or their vacation, you're sort of like, you nod and you smile politely. So I know I need to keep this brief so that it's not boring to you or to others. One, it's hard to believe it's been 2 decades since we started. In the building next door, it was just me at first, and then we brought some other people on. So I don't know whether to just express gratitude or also apologize to people who've been in the mix. But I'm certainly grateful to our clients, to people we've partnered with externally, and to everybody who's worked at Strategic Treasury, continues to work at Strategic Treasury. There are good times and there are hard times. And so I'm very grateful to everybody who's played a role through all these years. There's been different iterations and organizations change. Growth is not exactly linear. It doesn't move in the same path. And so there's been a lot of really good relationships that I've had. So I'll just express that and finish the vacation slideshow there. But in terms of some of the key lessons, I think what's important, a couple important things to bear in mind is we already talked about diversification. This idea of diversification across all areas for risk management in Treasury. And we talk about being the adult in the room, et cetera. We should think about diversification of risks, not just the supply chain, but of risk. How do we quantify things? How do we stratify the level of risk so we can prioritize our defenses against the biggest risk, but not ignore the ones that seem to be, that seems almost impossible. Nobody would have expected that. You know what? We can always say that, but there's so many things that can happen. I think we need to know that we don't understand everything that happens. And so diversification is a very, and I don't want to say natural hedge, but a very effective way of reducing or blunting the impact of some of those areas that we don't know. How do you respond to what you don't know? You pay attention so you can react quickly, and you also diversify so your risk is not completely centered in one area. It's not just you have one basket of eggs and you watch that very, very carefully. There should be some diversification of thought, diversification of risk so you can respond to it. That's probably one of the biggest lessons of managing risk and liquidity. The other is technology is always changing. Future proofing is making sure you're looking far enough ahead, you're moving to technology that makes sense, and you're setting your organization up to succeed. And some of that on the tech side is also the mindset. Once you've solved a problem at one stage, that may have been a great solution. 3 years, 5 years, 2 years, some period of time later, what was world-class may be very suboptimal. There might be many other better solutions. And so don't just look past things that you've already looked at once. And it's natural to do that because you have to say, I'm not going to keep revisiting the prior activities and decisions I made. I need to keep moving forward. The problem is not everything is moving forward. We still need to accomplish things. We may need to review what we've done because maybe some of the best opportunities are to redo something you did 8-10 years ago or that your organization did. So those are just a couple of the things, sometimes born out of observations, also sometimes born out of experience, both successful and negative. The last thing I would say is I find the most engaging treasurers and those who will be treasurers are those who say, tell us what you think in an unvarnished way and explain why and defend it so that they understand what needs to be done, why it needs to be done. They'll ask you how you would do it. They may hire you to help do it. Those people seem to do the best. We love working with those people because they're engaging, they're tackling issues. They tend to move. And so when I see that, it's like you can tell who's going to be the next AT, the next treasurer, maybe at that organization, maybe somewhere else. But they're looking and not resting.
Can I ask you one follow-up question? From a human resources or leadership perspective, when you started Strategic Treasurer, the world of podcast or webinars or videos were not around. And today, Strategic Treasurer has a very successful podcast. It has an amazing YouTube channel, and you have a lot of literature and resources, reports, white papers, ebooks, which I would exhort you to go to strategictreasurer.com and look them up and review them. Just from a curiosity, leadership perspective, is there anything that you would like to advise, particularly the younger lot of the corporate treasury realm, that, reading, watching, listening, anything else in particular that you would advocate they should do so that it will make them better leaders, more skillful in terms of technical and business skills?
Yeah, the fact that there's so many different ways to consume material, like that's changed. Podcasts really weren't around. There were ways to share information, right? Blogs used to be a massive thing, and now there's virtual video blogs, video logs, et cetera, all those different areas. So, that idea that you're a continual learner is one aspect, but also you'll learn from different media makes sense. And when we share, we see the shift in what people want to consume. It very much changes. Like what do people read and consume before they buy technology, before they buy consulting services? They're reading stuff in depth. What do they consume when they're gaining information? Webinars, videos, short form, moderate form, simpler writing. There's a level of, I gain knowledge at a certain level using these, let's just call them more simple methods, and the more complex or weighty or packed written material is used, but that's when they're like, hey, now we're really serious. We get into that. I find that interesting. It seems that everyone has a preference, but at certain points, I need to understand things broadly, or I need to go very deeply when I'm making decisions. So I would say be open to different methods other than your preferred. Don't just rely on doom scrolling and shorts.
Well, those are wise words. Be open to different methods. We've reached the conclusion of this episode. We are grateful for your informative analysis insights, Craig. Many thanks.
Thank you, Push.
We also want to express our sincere appreciation to our CTM File audience for tuning into this edition of the Open Treasury podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast and check out the show notes for links to the articles discussed. Thank you and have a wonderful week. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTM File or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.